But welcome everybody to Tea, Coffee, and Code for Wednesday, May 12th, oops, that's the wrong button again. 2021. This is Jim McKeith, and we're going to today be discussing automation, modernization, and workflow. Improve your productivity and modernize your workflow, and whatever that leads to in the discussion and conversation today. Just short disclaimer, this is an informal conversation. So, if somebody shares something and you're like, oh, I implemented this code, it didn't work the way I expected it to. Well, this was a coffee shop conversation. This wasn't specific advice. So do keep that in mind. Things are subject to change. So joining me today, we have Wagner Landgraf and Glenn Dufke, and I'll introduce them here shortly. We'll start with Wagner. Wagner, why don't you go ahead and just introduce yourself real quick? I'm sure, hopefully everybody knows who you are. If not, everybody should get to know Wagner. He's an awesome guy.
Thanks, Jim. Well, you have I believe everyone is seeing this slide, right?
Yes, correct.
Yes, I'm mostly known by working with TMS software. I'm the project manager of TMS business line of products, which contains products like TMS Aurelius, TMS Xdata, TMS Remote DB. So I'm usually working with the Delphi community by supporting and developing and talking about these products. And I'm also have a personal website, landgraf.dev, where I do training courses about Delphi and hold a Delphi blog. And I've been in the Delphi community for a long time. Since the Delphi 1, I work with Delphi. And I'm glad that I'm a recent Embarcadero MVP as well.
Yeah. It frequently, it surprises me how often someone will say, hey, so-and-so should be an MVP, or someone says, hey, can I be an MVP? And I'm like, oh, I thought they were an MVP. Because in my mind, the ideal MVP should already be acting like an MVP before they become an MVP. So unfortunately, too often, I think they're already MVPs. So
that happened to me recently.
Yeah,
I entered a private WhatsApp group for Brazilian MVPs, and some people were congratulating me, and a few said, I thought you were already an MVP.
Yeah, exactly. So it really MVP is about recognizing, the enthusiastic expert end users, which interestingly turns out to be all starting with letter E. But just those, the people that are in the community just doing a great job sharing their expertise and talking to people. So yeah, glad to have you on as an MVP. Don't know why it took so long. And then Glenn, he's been a bit of a regular here on the couple of these. He always has some interesting stuff to talk about. Glenn, you want to tell us real quick about yourself?
Hello, I'm Glenn Dufke. Yeah, and thank you for having me. I'm from Denmark and run my own little consulting company. I've been, programming since Delphi 7. Of course, I also use different other tools, but Delphi is the primary tool, and right now it's the latest version, 10.4.2. I spend a lot of time advocating for the Object Pascal programming language. I experiment with compilers and electronics, and I also run my little coding blog at code-kungfu.com. And just like Wagner, I'm also an Embarcadero MVP. So yeah, that's me.
Awesome. I just realized sorry, I don't know why I'm getting people messaging and stuff, everything going on at once. It's like, okay, so real quick about me, if you don't know who I am, surprise, I'm Jim McKeith, developer advocate here from Embarcadero, longtime software developer, blogger, podcaster. I've been doing so many webinars. I don't do my podcast as often as I'd like to. Working on doing that more. Actually, I've been working with Glenn and Zach and Dave Nottage, and we've started a new podcast called Delphi Mystics that I should put a link in for that. We've been started doing content with that as well. It's one of those things that it's just so easy to get busy doing everything. Actually, I was just talking to Glenn about this beforehand, that my job and my hobbies are the same thing. So it's like trying to manage my job stress. Sometimes I just completely, it's like all I do is the same thing 24/7. It gets hard to turn things off. So anyway, yeah, that's me. And so this is a Q&A discussion, as I mentioned, kind of a coffee shop conversation with developers about developer-related topics. So put your questions in the question panel here, and we will do our best to answer them. Try and keep them somewhat related to automation, workflows, and modernization, and whatever that means to you. So if you're like, oh, I thought you were going to discuss this, okay, we'll discuss that now. We do have a couple slides, some things that we wanted to share, but by no means this is the limits to what we can discuss. Usually I schedule this for 2 hours. I'm like, we won't actually go 2 hours. And we usually end up going the full 2 hours, a little longer, just because it's like always some good conversation happening. So do put your questions in, and we'll do our best to get them answered, or at least discuss them. I listed out a few topics that I thought we might cover at some degree as well. So there's some thoughts. Like I said, if you're like, oh, I expected something else, put it in the question panel, and I'm sure we can ruminate on that as well. So as far as build automation, I did want to put some resources in here for build automation, because I think that's a really important thing. So actually, let me go back a slide. Let's start with a couple things on this. So why automate? I don't have any slides on this, but I think this is really something we should discuss, is why should people want to automate their process and their workflows and such? What do you think, Glenn?
I think because we developers, we are lazy. No, I mean, the thing is that the more we can automate, the better. And also from an error point of view, because when we automate, for instance, a testing process, it is within the fixed confinements of what we have defined in our test. Like if you're doing a UI test, it's the continuous test you're running through testing the UI functionality, which if there's a human involved, they might forget to click a specific button or test a specific use case where there might be an error. So that's essentially why it's important to automate in the first place. Free up time, make it easier. We can focus on do what we are best, writing code.
Yeah, Wagner, what are your thoughts on that?
There's not much else to add, because it boils down to automation itself. It's save time and save resources, and that part of error is important, mentioned by Glenn, because we usually think about automation and think about saving time, just save time, but automation also saves you money and time by, like Glenn said, avoiding you to make mistakes. It's usual. It's kind of when you release something or test something, you have to have a checklist. Even if you have a checklist, if it's manual, you might forget it. You always forget something if the checklist is huge. So that's the point of it.
Yeah, I was thinking about this, in prepping for this. I was thinking, it's kind of, as software developers, we like it when things are deterministic, right? We like it when things behave the same way every time. Imagine if, that when you were writing code or allocating or deallocating memory, if it was required, somebody else to say, oh, wait, let's see, allocating memory, let's see, I have to press this button here and do this and do that, and they were doing it all manually, we would be frustrated. if that's the way the memory manager behaved. And so, as example, or anything we do, right? If we write code and we expect something to happen and that doesn't happen the same way every time, it would be frustrating. And so really automation is about, making our processes act that way, as that they act the same way every time, that they act deterministically. So anyway, that was kind of my thoughts on it. But yeah, I love Glenn's comment about being lazy. They say, I heard necessity is the mother of invention. I would say that laziness is maybe the father of invention. So
Not only lazy, I believe programmers, developers also don't like to repeat themselves.
yes,
Every repetitive task is boring. So you just if you are as developer realize that you are repeating the same thing twice, sometimes you think about automated, even if it's not needed. But you just get bored about repeating the same thing all the time.
yes, yep.
Exactly.
If I do something a second time, I'm always like, this should be automated. So
And
I guess go ahead.
automation, like in this presentation, we're primarily going to talk about the tools, but we can also boil it down to automation in forms of simple scripts. We've been using like VBA macros in Office as an example. That's also automation.
Yeah, absolutely. So automation can be scripts, or it can be a Delphi program. I frequently find I have a lot of things I do related to databases, and I will frequently just drop some FireDAC components or maybe some enterprise connectors or whatever, and effectively build an automation just by setting some properties on a form. And sometimes sometimes you don't even have to run it, right? You just be able to, from the IDE, be able to execute everything you need to do to make the automation happen. But it's really a matter of, like Glenn said, not repeating ourselves and making things more reliable and such. Say something once, why say it again? Talking Head, Psycho Killer, James Daniel. Yeah, yes, yep. What are some besides automating your build process, which we have some slides we're going to talk about there, but what are some other things you might automate? Wagner, what are your thoughts about what are things you automate, or how do you see automation showing up in things that you do?
Besides building, testing, it's one of the things. I have to review it here, but yeah, I try to automate everything because, as I said, when I realize I'm repeating things, I just try to automate it. For in my side, it's mostly building and testing that I do automation right now.
Yep.
And since we're talking about it, well, we're going to talk about build process soon. Okay.
Yeah. Actually, so let's go ahead and I'll go ahead and bring the slides back up, and we can go into. So a few tools we're going to put up here, tools about build process automation. So first one is Jenkins, which is used by a lot of people. It's a pretty popular one. It's an open source automation server with plugins in there, and there's a few links to things to use with that you can do with automation, or for automating with Delphi and such. As far as build automation, do you guys have a one you prefer, or one you use, or are you guys using Jenkins, or Glenn?
Yeah, I mean, I primarily work with the Microsoft Azure DevOps server.
Okay.
Since most of the clients I've been involved with, they already been heavily invested in Microsoft products. I have only briefly touched Jenkins. That was in an existing instance. I had to make some adjustments. So I'm only, limited familiar with Jenkins.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
I have not used Jenkins yet, but I'm considering using it. Actually, I used a commercial build tool in the past, but then I we have built our own in-house build system, and that does a lot of things like building, installing, and testing and uploading and things like that. But our build tool is Delphi, actually.
So you're using like a command line MS build? Is that what you're doing, or what is it? You?
Yeah, but we have used Delphi to build our build tool, which
Oh,
do
yeah,
a
okay.
lots of tasks, including calling MS build, yes, or
Yeah.
DCC32.
Yep. Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's that's something I found a lot like myself, is that frequently I mean, it's good to see what the tools are out there, but frequently I end up building or at least customizing things a lot myself as well. So the Jenkins is one. Another one that's very popular in the community, of course, is Final Builder from Vsoft. That's a great one out there. Vincent is actually, I messaged Vincent asking if he could be up on the webinar today, but he didn't work out schedule wise. They have 3 tools. They have Final Builder, Continua, Continuous Integration, and Optimize. So that's a good question actually. What's the difference between how do you define continuous integration? Is that just build automation? Glenn, what do you think?
I mean, essentially, yes. I mean, it's, you know, to, break it down in terms of, with Azure DevOps Server, we're going to talk more about that later, but, in essence, that you commit some code, and every time the code is committed to the repository, it runs some pre-commit tests, are your code working? Is it passing a unit test? If all these checks out, it will compile the project, produce the installer. You can automate the whole phase. So yeah, that is, essentially continuous integration. You're constantly generating new builds, and it's being triggered automatically. That is the short version.
So it's you have responses faster about the changes you are doing in your code, right? You don't realize that you have introduced a compilation bug or a break just 2 weeks after you are coding. That's one advantage of it. You get a response right in time, and you can respond to it faster.
Yeah, I think continuous integration it's both. It's like the build process plus the testing and everything happening all as you're making changes to it, so that you kind of know what's happening. I guess it's one of those things. It's kind of like it's you when you see it, you know what it is. But it's not just build automation. Yeah. But yeah, that's a really good point though about you want to know when something fails as soon as possible, right?
Yes. And the build pipeline process allows you to insert additional tools, like in Python you can actually have a pre-commit tool that triggers and checks, for the formatting, if the formatting is following the same spec you have defined. You could also have like a tool like SonarQube, which do static code analysis for known vulnerabilities. So there is a lot of great features you can utilize when you have a continuous integration pipeline.
Yep. So since Glenn, you said this is what you use Azure DevOps, let you talk about this real quick.
Yes. Azure DevOps Server is actually a Microsoft rebranded product. It used to be Team Foundation servers, which are Microsoft's answer to a complete product of source code, version control, project management, CI, CD, a full tool suite that integrates in a Microsoft development environment. They used to in the older products, they used to have the proprietary team TFS, was it? Yeah, TFS, their Visual Source Safe, I think was, sorry. Their proprietary solution for versioning control. But as part of the process of rebranding to Azure DevOps, and also when they put it into the cloud, they moved to Git. So now Git is the default backend for the whole versioning process. And I mean, one benefit, of course, with Azure DevOps is as a core, it is based around MS Build, and Delphi projects are MS Build projects. So the whole element there ties in together. Of course, when you're integrating Delphi or C++ Builder for that matter, there is some additional steps, since there is not, a ready-to-use plugin, since Microsoft's only advertising their own tools, and some of the more popular like Node.js, Python, Java. But it is possible to actually integrate the Delphi build process into Azure DevOps Server.
Yeah, I put a link at the. Oh, there's the question panel. I put some links in the resources section. Well, I'll put the slides in there for everybody too. I'll put the slides in the handouts area, or if you're watching the replay, there'll be a link to it, so you can get to that. Actually, here's a question about automation. It says, I want to automate the compilation and submission process to app stores. I plan to use Monkey Builder. Do you know of a better or alternative for Delphi? I have not looked into actual deployment to app stores, but I know people are using that. Doing that, and it's not something I've delved into personally. Have either of you looked at that at all?
I've seen Graham, which are the author behind Monkey Builder, talking about the project and advertising the project. I must admit I have not tried it myself, but it looks pretty well thought out in terms of automating the deployment and building of both Android and iOS applications. And especially if you have multiple applications and you need to generate APKs and IPAs for the two platforms.
It surprises me how often I'm like, discover some tool that's like, I did not know this existed. This looks really cool. I'm sure, so Monkey Builder looks like a great option. I would definitely check that out. It looks like there's a lot of great stuff in here. I need to play with this now. I'm very interested in this, but I imagine there are other tools out there that you could use to, oh wait, okay, yes, I do know about this, sorry. Graham made this, yeah, sorry. I just hadn't been to the website. I talked to Dave Nottage and Graham about this early on, like a year ago, when they were talking about building this, and I just had something I hadn't thought about recently. Okay, all right, making sense now. I'm sure there are other tools out there that can do the deployment to the App Store, because Delphi is not the only tool for that. But you would, so if you have something else that's doing the build process, you're building and you're testing, that's Delphi specific, and then you can just push it off to that to go into the App Store. That's really cool. Very cool. So here's a good question, Glenn. I see you already typed an answer for it, but does automation create an attack surface for a vulnerability? How do you weigh that if it does?
Right. And I think that question ties into some of the recent supply chain attacks. There have been announced in the public. One of the more talked about is, of course, SolarWinds. And according to their setup, they're based around TeamCity, which is a JetBrains tool for CI/CD and the whole process. And I mean, the thing is that yes, your pipeline can be compromised in ways. For instance, if you have a project, let's say it's a Node.js project, and you rely on several npm packages, if you don't, if you're pulling your packages from an online registry, you actually run the risk of your packages can be compromised. And it's been shown before that npm packages have been compromised with malicious code. So, for instance, make sure you have a local repository of vetted packages, and you do manual code review of the packages you use.
But is this inherent to the automation itself? Because that compromise can happen in a manual environment as well, isn't it?
It can also happen in the manual environment, yes. The reason why I mentioned here in the automation process is because I've seen some people misconfiguring their servers to just pull the packages from, they mark, we use this particular version of a package and we just pull it instead of actually having a local repository. And of course, then we have the more sophisticated attacks where if a malicious group of people are attacking your supply chain, they can, for instance, patch your build process and insert code in the build process. That's something that actually happened in the SolarWinds case, if I remember correctly. I need to check and verify, but if according to the article at least, they patched the build process, so when it was doing the final build, they inserted the malicious code, so it was not detected in their repository and the rest of the process. And that is something that can become dangerous, especially when you're doing your release builds and you're signing your application with your certificate. Then you suddenly have a signed application you're distributing, and that's not good.
I think automation increases your attack surface, but because you can certainly be attacked or compromised without automation. There's lots of things that could happen.
Yes.
If anything, I guess you could argue that automation, because it improves your throughput, it makes you more productive, that if you're not paying attention, right? So if you have a process that used to take, you 4 man hours to, go through and do manually, and you automate that so you can now do it in 15 minutes, which of course that's our goal. And now you're taking those other 3 hours and 45 minutes and not devoting it to checking what you were doing, and instead just running that over and over and over again across multiple projects, and your attention's now divided and gone elsewhere. Then you are, if you've taken out those checks, right, that things happen, then you could create problems. So I would say if automation's done right, though, it should reduce your attack surface and make you more secure, because you can build automated checks in. What do you think, Wagner? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I agree. Because
yes.
You have security checks in your workflow, and that you might forget, or that it might be difficult to do because it's manual. So automation will make sure you not forget them, or that you do them for sure in your process.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So we a few weeks ago I had Anders Olsen on, and he was talking about that they were introducing on their he works at Wide Orbit, and they build software for TV stations and radio stations, and the software is hosted on their servers, and they have or on the client servers, so they have their Microsoft SQL Server database, and then they have the middleware that Wide Orbit builds, and then the Wide Orbit client. And he was talking about that they've integrated a lot of instrumentation into their middleware, so it can monitor their server load and stuff like that. And I, in the past, have done a lot of instrumentation and measurement stuff on workloads and stuff, because I find that's a good indication of something maybe is not happening the way it should, right? And so that can be an early warning sign that, you know, all of a sudden I have extra network traffic going on that shouldn't be happening, or more processing load or something, or, you know, this is big, all of a sudden got filed, all of a sudden got bigger than it should be or something. Could be, you know, additional indicators of, you know, possibly something having gone wrong in maybe a security, a exploit happening. Shouldn't be your only indication, but certainly could be part of that.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and then Travis CI is another continuous integration platform out there. It's now owned by Idera, which there's been a number of, there's some of the Idera acquisitions have been like, what's the tool called? Travis CI was like, oh wow, I know Travis. I was just looking at Travis. Travis is really cool. So it's one of the big players in the continuous integration space out there. So we actually had a conversation with them about adding Delphi to their platform as one of their hosted ones. Their platform is built on Linux, not Windows, and Delphi runs on Windows, but you can get the command line compilers and stuff to work on Linux. So I don't know if that's still being discussed or not, but I would love to see it happen. But you can run Travis CI, can do the same thing like Azure pipelines and stuff, where you can have it connect to a local build server, but that's another good option. So actually, let's see. Oops. Sorry, I just need a question here I wanted to bring up, and there's a slide related to it. So let me just, there we go. So David Cornelius said, oh, let's see, where's the slide? Come on, read. Okay. David Cornelius said, creating a script or program to automate a task is often much more difficult than doing the task itself. I would propose that the truly lazy person would not take the effort to automate, but it would just do the task over and over manually and waste a lot of time. That's true. and there's actually also, I think this is a great example, this XKCD. Seems like there's always a good XKCD comic related to any topic you want to discuss in software development. But it is well, I think this happens to us in software development in general, not just related to automation, right? Because oftentimes it goes back to what Wagner was saying about we don't want like repeating ourselves, right? So we're doing something and you're like, oh, I could build a library or a component that can do this for me because I keep writing the same pattern over and over again. And you have to be careful. I don't know, maybe this is just me, but sometimes I'm like, okay, well, let me abstract what I'm doing out here into a component or library. And then pretty soon I'm like, oh, well, I can add all this other functionality in here and improve this and whatever. And pretty soon, you know, this thing that's supposed to automate this process became more work than the entire project is supposed to help in the first place. Does that happen to anybody else, or is that just a me thing?
It happens all the time. Actually, my TMS colleague, Adrian Galero, he mentions, he refers to a term that is yak shaving. Have you heard about it, Jim?
Yes, that's right. I've heard of that. I forget about it, but yes, I've heard about it. Yes. You want to explain that to everybody?
Yeah, I was hit by that this week because I was building I made a blog post this week in my blog about a 3-state checkbox review, right? And actually I was benefiting from a yak shaving there because I was building a tool to automate some internal task here. And then I was building a tool with Delphi. Then I realized I want to build a user interface for it to make my life easier. Then I realized I need a tree view. Then I realized I need a checkbox review. In the end, I was just to find out how to build a 3-state trivial checkbox in my application. So yak shaving, maybe you can explain better because I'm not a native English speaker, but it's something like this. You need to do a task and then you realize for that task to complete, you have to do something else. And in the example of the yak shaving, I think the guy was lawn mowing the grass, I think, needing some hose to do something in the backyard. And he realized he needs A, then to do task A, he needed some B stuff. And in the end, he was in the zoo shaving a yak because he needed some to fill some pillow because he stacked a lot of tasks.
Yeah, exactly. Is it where trying to do one thing just leads to a spiral of events that happens here? Actually, I'm going to put this link in the chat. There's a TV show a while back called Malcolm in the Middle that has a scene where Hal, the dad, so it's a family with 4 boys, I think, and they're, just the usual sitcom, and the dad goes to change the light bulb, but then when he goes out in the garage, the light doesn't work for the garage, the shelf is broken, and so he goes to fix the shelf, and then he opens the drawer, and the drawer's squeaking, and so he goes to get the lubricant to fix the drawer, but he's out of WD-40, so he goes to start the car to drive, but then the car is making a funny noise. So his wife comes home and she looks and she's like, comes out to the garage. She's like, Hal, the light bulb's out in the kitchen. He goes, what does it look like I'm doing? And he's under the car with the car taken apart to fix the car to go, so yeah, it's that. Exactly. That's exactly. I love that. That I've forgotten about that, but that's a good point.
So sometimes, back to the topic, it happened to me. I was actually fighting with the automation tool. So that's one problem that arises in my programmer life. It's that I want to automate something and it started well, but then, especially with third-party tools, or actually in-house tools as well, is that you end up fighting the automation tool and you lose time. So you have to pay attention to that as well.
That's a really good point. And actually, it kind of comes back to what David was talking about as well, right? Is that the truly lazy person wouldn't automate it. They would waste their time. So part of my work, I've always been the kind of person that's like, well, let's just figure this out. And I'm just like, we need to do this. I'm like, okay, well, I understand the basics of Linux, so sure, I can set up a web server, and get it over my head really quick. But Otness and some of the other managers are trying to encourage me to delegate things more. And delegating is the same thing, in that delegating can be a lot more work than doing it yourself. Same thing if you've had kids, right? And you're gotta train your kids to do the chores instead of doing the chores yourself. The first 2 times, man, it is 10 times more work to get your kids to do the chore or to delegate it to somebody else, right? You have to explain what you want and work with them to make sure they understand and make sure they're producing what you want. So, but in the long run, right, it goes back to that XKCD comic, right? Is in the long run, we expect that the automation or the delegation is going to reduce the effort from the original task, but there is certainly some debugging and maintaining that as well. So it usually is not, this is a worst case scenario. this is when you shave the yak, when you realize that it's not applicable. But you do need to be aware that there is, for some tasks, I don't know. My goal is always to automate everything I can, and I try to delegate as much as I can too. But it's not always possible, and there is overhead in doing that as well. So
there is indeed. But I mean, of course, when you're integrating an automation tool, and that is regardless if you're using an open source tool like Jenkins or Azure DevOps, or there are even automation tools. From a general perspective, there's like Ansible or Chef scripts. A friend of mine who is he's a great Python developer, a Django expert. He spent a lot of time with Ansible, but that also meant that the company he worked for before he started his own thing, they could instantly spin up instances in Amazon with all the Ansible automation. And since they had to scale up and down, the time he had spent creating these Ansible automation scripts, they did a calculation of how much time they have saved, and they probably saved around 300 man hours just by I think he spent probably a week getting all the scripts tied together and with Ansible. So I mean that is an example that, yes, the initial curve of getting your automation off the ground, has an initial cost, but when you have a long-running automation, regardless if it's deploying instances in the cloud or continuous development and integration and deployment with the tools we're discussing today, you can really save a lot of time. But I also think it's very important to look at what type of task it is and really evaluate, is it worth I'm spending maybe 2 days integrating this automation task, or am I not doing it often enough to justify the work?
That is a good point. You do need to, actually, I was just typing a response to David's, that you need to think through the, what are going to be the payoff of automating this? And sometimes automating, isn't about productivity. Sometimes automating is about making it more repeatable, right? So if you think about like airline pilots, right? They have this huge checklist of things they have to go through that takes them an hour, right? And that's kind of a form of automation, but it's if you will, it's a process. I guess that's what it is. It's a process. And so in that case, they have this process not to make it more so they can get off the ground faster. I mean, they try to do that, but also just to make sure that they've done everything they need to do, that everything is the way it's supposed to be for safety purposes. And so automation lets you do both those things, right? It lets you look at the make sure you're not missing things, right? So sometimes we automate things and it takes more time because to maintain that, but it's about the repeatability, where other times we automate things to reduce the to make it more productive. But yeah, being aware of what the potential is, and the overhead and stuff like that are all really important parts of that. So there was a few questions about automating to the App Store. We mentioned Monkey Builder. I put a link to a blog post about a plugin for Jenkins that does that too. There are APIs and stuff like that out there for that. You can certainly find some options for that. A question here that's interesting: Circle CI service with one-click setup for GitHub. Anything like that? It's easy to set up for new projects. That's interesting. Would you explain a little bit about what that is, Glenn? Or
I must admit I only have limited knowledge about Circle CI, but to my knowledge, it's when you're doing open source project, especially on GitHub, they do have some automation integrated. And of course, now that Microsoft owns GitHub, there is tighter integration with their Azure DevOps continuous integration stuff. But in essence, is that you actually can do automated builds and testing on GitHub, and that's why in many of the popular projects you see is the build passing or is the build failing for a particular platform? So I think that is probably, get that part integrated with Delphi. I think the challenge is that since the Delphi compiler, even being a command line compiler, is it's command line, it's Windows only, and we are paying a license to use this software. You cannot just put it out in the cloud, and especially when, like, for instance, when you're integrating with the Azure DevOps server, you actually install a build agent that talks to the compiler and do the whole integration with the Azure DevOps pipeline. So to answer the question, there is some work to do to get that integrated, but it's not like overly complicated. Which one thing I've personally been invested in and looking into is with the recent versions of Windows, where you actually can run Windows containers. That means you actually have containerization of Windows. That means you suddenly have a containerized and repeatable environment. And I thought, well, if you can containerize Windows, why not have a containerized version of the Delphi version? So say if you're building your product with multiple different versions of Delphi, let's say you're providing components and you need to provide precompiled packages, you need multiple versions of Delphi installed. Having that in a confined containerized space where you know exactly this is the configuration, I see that could be very beneficial. And of course, that could also tie into having a build agent that talks to Circle CI or a different build system.
Interesting idea. So kind of just how to get that, automate the process more. That's a good idea. There's Brian was just talking about that he's doesn't want to have his content hosted on Amazon, and he wants to figure out how to local hosting GitHub or local hosting Git repository on his own network, but not having any luck getting the GitHub desktop to talk to localhost. So I was suggested that he look at using, I use SourceTree, there's Fork, or the Git CLI, because GitHub desktop client is specifically for github.com. Roland shared a link to some details on JetBrains. So I have some friends involved in cybersecurity. JetBrains is just one of the, I'm sorry, SolarWinds and JetBrains is just one example of things that have happened. And part of that is there's a lot more exploits going on, and just it's part of the always evolving landscape we're a part of. I don't know that you can't. It's easy to point at something and say that's wrong. That should you shouldn't use that tool or whatever, but that's not really the case. It was a combination of things. James says, if it takes one programmer 1 week, it'll take two programmers 2 weeks. So what is that called? There's that thing about that it's discussed in Mythical Man Month, that as you add more developers, it adds more communication that's required. So that's a problem from there, because overhead of the communication. But there is, if you can properly manage the process and divide it up, right? Part of the decoupling, right? So you can have things that can be done by different people in different areas through delegation and stuff. Then there are some economies that you can attack there, but you do need to be intelligent about it. I can't remember who it was, said that project managers think that if one woman can have a baby in 9 months, then 9 women can have a baby in 1 month. So, you have to be aware of things that are dependencies on each other. Well, and that goes to the conversation we had on concurrency and threading as well, right? Is that some processes are linear, right? That having multiple cores is not going to accelerate them, but some things you can divide up over multiple cores and threads and speed them up. So it's really it's never a silver bullet, turn something on and just have it magically work. So I'm going to share a slide here. There's this book, Automate the Boring Stuff with Python. Python's a good choice to add some scripting automation to your processes. There's a fantastic IDE, PyScripter, and the Python for Delphi library that would let you actually combine Python and Delphi in every way you can possibly imagine. We did some webinars on that, but it's just a good example of looking at things that you're doing repeatedly and how to automate them. It's a good, it's a good tool for that, and it's a book on that. And there's a link in the resources section that is an online Creative Commons licensed version of that you can read for free. Another tool I've used before is AutoHotkey. I don't know if either of you have used AutoHotkey, but it's a great tool for automating things on Windows. I mean, there's a lot of things you can use. You can use batch files. You can use PowerShell. I've been doing a lot with PowerShell. It's pretty powerful. Lots of great command line tools on Windows as well as Linux that you can use via bash scripts on Linux or whatever. But
actually, Microsoft have ported PowerShell to Linux, so you can actually use PowerShell scripts on both platforms. Honestly, yes, PowerShell is powerful. You can do a lot of things with PowerShell, and do more. A bit easier compared to for instance, a traditional batch script. However, I would say the way the syntax has been, constructed and it runs on top of the .NET framework, it can be a little tedious to work with.
I would just recommend, whatever tool you use, there's lots of options out there. Just learn some ways you can automate in your processes and such, and start working on that. Let's see. Chris says, learning to delegate and allowing employees to do things slower and make mistakes is a management lesson. Yes, that's what I'm still trying to learn. And Pat says, the catch in delegation is to recognize that the delegation is repeatable enough to justify the time work it takes to do the training. For example, the student you've hired, and take the time to teach how to do the task. Quits for some reason, same for the automation. Yep, exactly. What are some examples of tasks that we've automated other than just compiling libs or apps? So we mentioned build process, testing. What else is repeatable? I try and reports is one that I automated, have done a lot of automation over the years, where you have somebody needs some data, whether it be me or somebody I work with or a customer that needs some data. And it used to be that it's like I'll just, go download this data into a spreadsheet and then open it up in Excel and, do whatever I need to do to make it work. And that's something I always try to automate as much as possible. How about you, Wagner? What are some of the things that you've automated or that you see that being a good thing to consider for?
Sorry. Well, as you know, I'm a component developer, so if I don't automate things here, I'll get crazy, because first we have to deploy, like Glenn said, we have to deploy binary packages for lots of Delphi versions. And so we have to build, that was not the question, but you have to automate the build of all packages of all products for all Delphi versions. And then there are side automations like creating the executables, that are automated, building the documentation from XML comments, and automating all the creation of the documentation. And uploading the documentation, uploading the installers to our websites. And actually, there are lots of automation that is done. Besides of the deployment of product itself, I try to automate lots of things like order. There are some specific manual order processing here that are automated using REST servers that I've built. There are automation that I use SaaS products, like this is more integration, but it's automation like Zapier or IFFT.
Yes. Well, yeah. Sorry. Yeah, I totally forgot about those. Those are great ones. I lose those too.
Yeah, they help. For example, you mentioned about Excel. I use Zapier, for example, just to get information from a source and fill a Google Doc, not Excel, but a Google Doc Sheets file. And it's a kind of automation, because otherwise I have to fill the data manually. So I automate lots of things all the time. For my job, it's for my main core automation. It's what I said. It's compiling, building, testing, and deploying, all automated.
Are there any, I guess, in your work that you do in that regard, are there any tools or tricks that you found? I mean, as make all the components that you are involved in and TMS are involved in is amazing. Any things that you've learned that you could share that maybe people might take advantage of?
Regarding something specific, you mean? I don't know. There are lots of things.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
For example, well, just a tiny thing. I was uploading things with FTP, and then I realized that S3 Amazon was much faster. That's one recent thing that I brought to mind. Testing, actually, I use lots of testing sites. It's a quite nice tool. I'm not sure if you heard about it for testing. It's for unit testing, but I use the unit, for example, which is unit testing. I use for integration testing as well. And I had a hard time with testing the components after Embarcadero started to release lots of platforms. You are complicating our life in Embarcadero by supporting iOS and Android and Linux and all of this stuff. And just kidding, of course, because the way to select tests and receive results were only built for Windows. So Stefan Glienke built a nice tool for testing sites, called it testing site, that receive test data from different sources. So that was a tiny thing that helped me to test and perform execute tests in different platforms and receive in a centralized place.
Yep. He just had a new release of Test Insight too.
Yep.
Remember correctly. That's a fantastic tool. Highly recommended. Test Insight. If you're not using that now, take a look at that. There it is.
And actually, one comment about I believe it's interesting for everyone. You have an installer now for a build version, for a build machine of Delphi, isn't it? It's recent, isn't it? From Delphi Sydney. Now you can install a build version of Delphi in a different computer, and I believe it's covered by the single license, isn't it? Maybe you can.
It is. Yes. So the license, I don't remember if that's released or not yet, but I think it is. The license is always allowed. It's the license based on the user, and so if you are, so let's say you're the only user and you want to have a build machine that's separate, you can install that there and it's covered by the license fine. If you have a team of 10 developers and you want to have a build machine that all those developers use, any of the license totally covers that. What you can't do is you can't set up a build server that is used by somebody that doesn't have a Delphi license. That's not a lot covered under the license. But as long as it's being used by people, so they can't write in Notepad and send it to the build server. That's against the license. But yeah, so the build, there was a I know that there's a command line installer now. I think there was discussion, I'm not sure if it's released, about a installer that is a minimal installer that does build machine. Is that what, did you say that was out, Wagner? I don't remember if it was or not. If not, it's coming soon, hopefully. But there's a command line installer available now.
Actually, with the release of 10.4.2, one of the key points was actually you could do a completely silent installation where you can say, okay, I want these platforms. Do you want to do it silently or complete silently? Which was meant for if you're doing mass scale deployment, like let's say you have 100 workstations you need to upgrade. So you can use that as part of the the process of setting up on a build machine if you don't have a GUI. But I honestly don't think if the build machine part where you say, okay, I only need the compiler and supporting files like the RTL, VCL, or FMX, and the command line compilers, and that's it. You don't need the IDE. You don't need the other bits and pieces. I don't think that is available yet.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So the silent installer is what's available now. I wasn't sure. It is tricky because I'm always like hear about like, hey, this is something we would like to do, and oh, this would be a feature request, and this is something we're working on, and then I can't remember at what point things release and stuff. So hopefully I didn't say something I was supposed to say. But yeah, the silent installer is out now, and that's a huge step, and it is covered under the license that's available now. What are some actually I think Glenn, did you give any examples of other things you've automated besides build process and testing?
Yes. When I do things, like experimenting with services I build, I like to put it on a little confined, some would say container, but for instance, in with a hosting service like DigitalOcean, where you guys can pay for per the minute of what you're doing, I have automated with some of with parts of the REST API to actually spin up a droplet, deploy the application, and do some stuff and take it down again. The same thing goes for another service called Vultr. I still need to look at Linode as service, and of course there's also Amazon, and there's Azure. But essentially what I'm doing here is like I initiate the process of saying, hey, I need a new instance. It spins up the instance and pushes some files, including SSH keys, and then automate the whole process of setting up the connection between my development machine and the remote session. Because once I have connected to the remote machine over SSH, I can, with PuTTY, I can actually say I want to do a SSH port forward, which is essentially it creates a port mapping from localhost. So it looks like I'm sitting on the local machine, but it's actually going on in the cloud. And I use it, for instance, on Azure. I experimented with some Linux machines there. So I spin up a Linux machine, put in PA server, and set up the SSH forward. Sorry, it says. So I just set it up the SSH forward, and then looks like I have my developed machine here in my office, but it's in the cloud somewhere, and I can just do debugging and deploying in the cloud. And the same thing also goes for my virtualization I use locally, both VMware and Proxmox VE server. They also have a REST API that allows me to automate things.
Actually, I remember.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I remember another thing that might be interesting for the audience, which is I work with, I develop Aurelius, which is an ORM, and that works with several databases. And for testing, we try to make sure that it works with several different databases that it supports. And so we have tests we run tests of Aurelius with SQL Server and Oracle and Postgres, etc. And since we are talking, Glenn mentioned about containers, and we use Docker, for example, to launch several different database versions on the fly to allow testing. And in the early days of Aurelius, I had to create a database manually and do things like that. And after we had a Windows XP machine with several database servers installed. And then, of course, with the upcoming of Docker, we were able to launch those databases automatically, and actually launch them from the build tool, because Docker also has an API, so you can remotely ask Docker to launch this stuff. So it's also a great tool to help you in testing and automation, because you can, of course, launch test environments very easily.
That's true. That's true. Actually, we have TCoffeeAndCode coming up on Docker and containers and stuff like that, and hopefully getting some Ansible and Terraform in there too, because those are really interesting technologies just to make that easier to manage platforms and infrastructure and stuff like that for testing purposes and such.
And also Kubernetes.
Kubernetes, yes. There's so much. It's so hard to wrap my head around it. I just can't keep track of it all. Paul says, I agree automation can bring benefits and time saving, but it's not always simple because you need to document it, put it under version control, issue management, etc. So quickly the burden of automation can grow far beyond original expectations. Are there any things we recommend to help with that? So the right automation process and workflow tools can help with the management of the automation process and workflow. But anything else, Wagner, anything you would suggest on how to keep the management of the automation in check?
Not much. You said yourself, the tool will be kind of self-documented, because you build your automation script or whatever, and it will say what the script does by reading the script itself, and the tools will have comments, places for you to describe and comment your process. So I'm not sure what else I have to add besides documenting it if you need it, of course, to the level you need.
Yep. Yeah. Okay. One thing I didn't put a slide in here for, I have slides up there now, working with databases. So this is something I've done a lot of work in the past with databases, and the right ways to manage deployment of databases and testing with databases and stuff like that can be tricky. Usually it involves building lots of scripts that we use for different things and such. Actually, I've built a tool once that could, we had this one project I was working on that was an incredibly complicated data model, and the process for doing some management of the database, there was a script we maintained that could do that all, but the script was hard to maintain that script. So I built a tool that could transverse the tree and understand the data model and then build the script dynamically. And that was a huge benefit. So that was an example of automation, I guess, replacing the manual building of that script with an automated process. I was going to put a link in here. I haven't used this in a while, but Rapid SQL is a tool from Idera that is useful for managing databases and deploying databases. And then I specifically have a thing about how to manage databases under version control. Anything you guys have used related to databases as far as like managing it or automating work with databases?
I have not.
Databases are their own creature. If you're not doing database work, it's like, I was working with I was at one company and we had hired this new developer that was really, really sharp, knew a lot about Delphi, but he had never used databases. He was self-taught and could do so much stuff, but he never ever touched databases and didn't understand the utility of them. And I explained databases to him and showed him how to use like in-memory data sets and how you could use SQL to do,
Well, I'm
work on a
suspecting.
set of data. Yeah, and
As I said, to deploy the databases, I use Docker a lot, and even in production, you can use it. And to maintain databases, we have developed and we actually license our own tools like Data Modeler and Aurelius, which are tools and frameworks that help you to build your structure automatically. And for example, with Aurelius, you modify your classes and it updates the database for you or in your clients automatically. So that's mostly what I do these days. I don't work with database scripts much anymore.
That's a really good point, actually. Something I think we as Delphi developers, sometimes take for granted or forget about is that the power of leveraging like some of the tools like TMS builds I mean, really those are an automation themselves, that they can, we can do that and get stuff done and be so much more, because if you think about if you had to rewrite the functionality in something like Aurelius every single time you needed that would just be ridiculous. And so it is a form of automation workflow improvement. So there's a question here from Brian. I see you answered it here already, but I'm going to elaborate on it, Glenn. It says, repeatedly is the need to build up or have a Delphi environment wound up for a new employee. Handed a new laptop and tasked with tweaking the Delphi environment until I can get their source code to compile. So there are some things you can use. There is the get it, and then there's the, what's it called? The settings migration tool. Yeah, migration tool. So you can use that to move some things around. We frequently put a lot of things in version controller scripts and stuff like that. Another thing, or different places I worked at. Another thing is that I've worked at a few places that use a lot of virtual machines. And so what they'll do is they'll have a virtual machine set up that this is, and what they do is they'll, someplace I work at, it's like they have different major versions of their project, right? And so this major version of the project, here's a version, virtual machine set up to work with that major version, and it has all the, and so you can check out maybe minor versions of the source from source control and work within that version, that VM, and that VM has all the everything set up, all the components and stuff like that set up and such, so that you can work with that. But then you have different right? So then each major version has a different version or different VM that you work with. And so that's a way of making it easy, especially for archiving it, right? So if you like, we're not maintaining this version anymore, but if a customer contacts us and like, hey, I'm still on maintenance and I still need a bug fix for this version that's 3 years old that you haven't updated in a while, you need to be able to spin that VM back up again to make those changes. So that was a good use for that. And I was talking to another developer that was looking at Amazon. I can't remember what it's called. Amazon has a desktop in the cloud, desktop as a service process, workstations. It was looking using workstations.
Amazon Workspaces is it called?
Workspaces, yes.
Yep.
So he's looking at using workspaces as a way to compartmentalize all the projects he's working on. And so the idea was that when he came on for consulting, he would set up a workspace for that one consulting project that would have all the licensed code for that. And he was going to bill each client a Delphi license and for all the components he was using. And then when he was done, he would then give them the credentials for that workspace. So they would then have that workspace to, if they had another developer they were going to bring and working on, stuff like that. Anything? So, I don't know if either of you have anything you want to add to that, or if Glenn, if you want to add something else to that. I see you typed an answer here as well, but.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of doing a replicated setup, also as I mentioned here to Brian, is that Delphi supports a parameter called -r, and then you can give a name of choice. You can have multiple instances, and what the -r is doing is basically creating a separate entry in the registry with a completely different set of settings, or essentially, it's a clean slate of settings for that entry, and then you can customize those settings, including packages or specific IDE settings pertaining to that particular project. And that means if you're, of course you can use the migration tool, but you can also export that registry key and distribute it to other computers and import it into the registry, and you just have the shortcut that say -r and then the name of that registry key you have exported. So in this case, like I said, my snapshot. So if you create a new key called my snapshot, and import that on a different machine, you can actually load in all the packages and configuration. And of course, if you're using custom packages, you of course need to make sure they are on the location you're specified. So like if you have a directory on the root of your C drive, make sure the packages on the new machine are located at the same place. But that allows you to have multiple configurations on the same machine if you don't have the hardware resources to have multiple virtual machines.
Yeah, that's a good point. I forget about that. Actually, I had some problem the other day, and you reminded me of that. I'm like, oh, that's right. That feature is there. I should do that. Okay, I think I have the discussion topics is up. Are there other things on this related to this? So someone brought up that you can use automation. So this actually ties into IoT, Arduino, robotics, and stuff like that. You can use automation. It could be automation in the physical world. Another thing I was reading an article about recently is the Lego Mindstorm has a huge adoption in science laboratories and such, that they use Lego Mindstorm to build simple automation robots for use in labs. So for example, if you have to something that has to be moved at every regular interval, right? Instead of having to have an intern or a student or whatever that goes in and does this and records that they did it, or something, you can build something really simple with Lego Mindstorm as a way to automate some sort of behavior in the physical world. You can do the same thing with Arduino or other apps, other robotics and such as well.
Yes. And I mean that of course that more on the hardware side of automation, but when you have the big production facilities, the more you can automate in the build process, the more advantage you have. And that's something Elon Musk have tried with his Tesla factory. I recall he at one point tried to do the whole production line with robotics only, but discovered there was certain elements of the production of the Tesla cars that would require human interaction, since the robots are just not at a point, currently at a point where automation is feasible. But in terms of scaling production, again, that's also automation, and the more you can automate your process, the more you can scale.
Yep. I was years and years and years ago, I was working at a company that manufactured PCs. I guess Micron PC. I usually don't like to say the name of previous employers, but they're out of business now. had built this new automated production floor and had this robot that would move these people. So they had this thing, this big rack where they could put these platters that held different computers in them. So as they're building that, because all the PCs were built to order. And I don't understand how this didn't work, but they had a problem where the robotic arm that would pick up the PC and move it into this rack didn't understand the weight of the computer it was moving. And so it would, and the weight, right, when you're moving between a server and a laptop is significant. And so it would move too quick with a laptop and fling the laptop across the room. It's like, I don't know how they could never fix that. It seemed like a really simple thing to do, but they ended up having to redesign it because they couldn't get that figured out right to handle the different weights. So there are, it seems like a lot of stuff should be automatable and stuff, but having a human involved to do some checks, and there's always going to be a need for us humans to stick around, it seems like. So
Yeah.
Dimitris has a comment here about TMS Web Core, and I know, Wagner, you're not involved in that specifically, but maybe you might have some insight. And I think Glenn, you've worked with this as well too. Says that you need to cut the application into pieces, how to deal with different parts of the compiled JavaScript code in different pages of the application that could be loaded in at a time and maintain the application in different parts after that. So you can, I mean, you kind of version control, and there's other things you can do that tie those things together. But I don't know, maybe there's something specific either of you can mention on that. I'm not sure I completely understand the question, to be honest.
Yeah, me too. I believe maybe he's talking about the generated application itself, but then this is a very specific question. I actually suggest that Dimitris contact us directly in our support. If that's the question, maybe you can clarify for us, Dimitris, about what we mean by cut the application in pieces. How to deal with different parts of compiled JavaScript codes in different pages of an application. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, so it sounds like you're right. It might be related to the compiled output of it, but yeah, not sure. Let's see. Roland pointed out Boyan Mitov's Visuino. If you're doing some work with Arduino, yes, check out Visuino. It's so cool. Actually, Boyan's got a number of great libraries in that space that are useful.
Glenn mentioned another great point about automation, which is scale. It's like repeat, and we mentioned in the beginning of the meeting about the advantages. It's scale is another very good advantage of automation.
Yes.
And
you know, especially, you know, since more and more services we build rely on being hyper connected, and you know, especially if you, I mean, it really doesn't matter what kind of product you build, but you know, at some point you might hit a milestone where suddenly you have a large influx of maybe new subscribers or what have you. But you know, your load are increasing substantially, and being able to you know, scale out horizontally, you know, can be very beneficial. And by scaling out horizontally, I mean, when you have you know, geolocation of your services. So say you have an IoT cloud service as an example. You build a product, and suddenly the product takes off, and all over the world people are starting using the IoT platform. And initially you build it in the US and have it located in a US data center, but being able to scale out and actually have the service located in different data centers around the world, and the underlying infrastructure knows when a customer in Australia are accessing your cloud service, okay, use my my cloud service located in Australia, but suddenly you maybe have a spike of users in Australia, so the service can automatically scale up and spawn new instances, doing all this automatically. And that's also part of the automation process, is being able to say, okay, I need more capacity. We spawn new instances instead of you have to go through creating a new instance and doing all the configuration. And that's also where if you had to do the configuration manually every time, that also introduce a much higher risk of errors and misconfiguration and data leaks. And data leaks is something we started to see more and more frequently, either by a misconfiguration. I would probably say misconfiguration of services are one of the largest contributors to data leaks in general.
Well, an interesting thing around data leaks is that, specific for developers, is I've seen a lot of times people will leave like their keys, API keys and stuff like that in source code. They check into public repositories and such, or whatever. Or there was recently a thing where someone was checked in their keys into a private repository, but then that got leaked through an exploit on the private repository. So you do need to be, that kind of goes back into the security conversation we'd had before about how to manage that security and stuff effectively and such.
Yeah, and that point actually ties into one of our topics here, let's say DevOps, and now we're actually moving towards the DevSecOps, because when your product, your company is at a certain size, you suddenly need to have a whole team where their prime focus and are ensuring your the security is in place. And again, that also ties into that there's automation tools in terms of checking for security breaches, but that's a whole different topic. But again, automation.
Yeah, exactly. Automating your ability to check for bugs or security issues and stuff like that is good, because it augments your ability to recognize them and detect them manually. So yeah. What about installations, creating MSIs for Windows or other installation platforms? Are there any suggestions or comments you guys have about that? There's a Roland suggests install-aware in a setup. Those are two I've used quite a bit, but there are other ones out there too. Install Builder, I think they're still a big one, aren't they?
Yes.
Install Shield.
Install Shield. Yep. I use InnoSetup, not to build MSI packages, but just regular exe installers. But myself, I use InnoSetup.
I think that having when building an installer, I think it's important to have an option to do a silent install, or make sure that your install is available via a scriptability, command line options and stuff. Also, was it David mentioned Chocolatey? I am a huge Chocolatey fan. I've been a subscriber. I actually pay for the pro level for a couple years now. If you haven't tried Chocolatey, chocolatey.org, recommended. Go take a look at that. Really, really useful. It's basically like it's a package manager for Windows applications. It's built on top of NuGet, which is the package manager for Visual Studio, but if I remember correctly, so it's similar to like APT or what's the one on Red Hat called? I forget. RPM, Red Hat Package Manager.
NPM maybe.
NPM. Yes, in NPM. Yep, exactly.
So Brew for Mac.
What is it? Which one you use? Oh, Brew. Yes. Yep.
I use Chocolate a lot. Actually, to set up new machines, because I have some build tools actually, which use third-party tools, and lots of small ones like I don't know, image converter and things like that, small tools. And I have built a Chocolate script. It's very handy with a single line of code. I install like 10 or 15 small tools and libraries that I need to set up, and it's very handy indeed. Another tool for automate set up the environment.
Yeah, I use that a lot. I have so I have a chocolatey, and then what was the other one I was using? Oh gosh, I can't remember what it was. That was the other one I was using that I have a I think it was
OneGet?
it for what? What is it? Oh, that's right. It was Brew. It was Brew for Mac. I was setting up a couple of different Macs, and I had a list of Brew packages I was installing, where so that I could just have that list that I was maintaining that I would just then use and redeploy it to other. I could spin up a new Mac quickly and easily. So that is a good one, or good tip for sure. Let's see.
Yeah, just to fill out with the installer procedure, I generally actually recommend using an install application. You know, whether you're using Install Shield or InstallAware or some other product. You know, it boils down to what you want to do. But for instance, Install Shield actually underneath creates an MSI package and then wraps that MSI package in an exe file. And for the most part, you can actually extract that MSI and do you know, silent installation. And you know, when you're doing mass deployment in enterprise situation, you know, Microsoft has a deployment tool, and there are also third-party tools. They operate by pushing out the MSI file to the clients and then do a silent install. But it's also, you know, very important to ensure that your installers are signed, code signed, I would say.
So David suggested I should do a blog post on blogs.embarcadero.com about Chocolatey and what I use it for. I will do that. I've actually mentioned it a couple times in a couple other blog posts, but I will do that. Actually, so yeah, I can do that. It's a pretty cool. There is a another MyGit. That's what it's called. So MyGit was originally part of Travis CI. That when Idera acquired Travis CI, they got MyGit as well, which is it's a platform for npm or NuGet or any of these other package distribution channels that then allows you to have your own private hosted one, if you will, so that you can have the your own, like Lynn was talking about, right? So you have your approved list of packages, your approved versions, so it can manage that for you for your, it's not local, it'd be in the cloud, but you know, if you have a distributed team, that can be really useful. But yeah, I'll take a look at that. Oh, actually, that reminds me, I just had a thing reminded me. I have I've set up a number of, Windows has the scheduler, right, where you can schedule tasks or things during different times. I actually use that quite a bit as well to do things like I use Adobe products and I don't want it just randomly updating at different times, and I don't want all the bloated stuff management software they have running all the time on my computer. So I actually have tasks that will kill that and take it out of memory, and then at 6 in the morning it fires it back up so that it can do its updating and all that stuff, and then so that's all done for me automatically. And then I have a couple other ones I do that with as well. I use the backup solution I have as well. I do the same thing where I it's scheduled. The backup is scheduled at a certain time, but then I unload the program from memory. So the program's not running all day, every day. It's only running when I want the backups to happen, because I was having some issues where because it was just there, it was hooking into something else that was causing some other issues and stuff. And then I have a script that restarts some of my networking VPNs and stuff like that at different times for different things. So there's a lot of great things you can do with the Windows scheduling program as well.
Also, I would say the most important thing: stop Windows from force rebooting when it has installed an update.
Actually, I have this just started happening again. I don't know why. I keep doing that and telling it not to do that. And then I swear Microsoft pushes out an update that breaks it. So do you have the current way to do that? Because mine is updating and rebooting automatically on its own again, and it's driving me bonkers. I haven't looked into it again. Okay.
I mean, here's a free tech tip. There is a freeware tool called Reboot Blogger. You can you can Google the tool, and it installs a little service that constantly cycles the active hours task in Windows, and that confuses Windows and thinks, oh, now I'm active, now I'm not active, now I'm active, now I'm not active. And that simply plugs the hole and tells Windows, don't force reboot when an update has been installed, because there are numerous times I had one of my virtual machines, I've been sitting and working, and suddenly I came back and the whole thing was restarted, and I was like, oh, not again, and at some point I just got so fed up with Microsoft's way of saying, I don't care what you're doing, I don't care about your work, I'm just gonna reboot. And I'm like, no, I'm in charge of my machine. So that's where I discovered this tool, and so far it's been the tool that have had the best results of plugging this hole. I mean, of course we should reboot often and install updates, but especially us software developers, we have some different requirements to when to reboot.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And that's a really good point, is that you do want to make sure you are rebooting and updating and stuff. So there's an interesting thing. Sorry, this reminded me of something. If you shut down Windows, so it used to be years ago that if you rebooted, some things didn't actually get completely flushed from memory, but if you shut down and then powered up again, it would. There were very rare situations that a reboot wouldn't fix something, especially if it was a hardware issue, but a shutdown restart would. Interestingly, Windows 10 uses a feature called Fast Boot now, I think it's called, that if you shut down Windows, it actually doesn't do a full shutdown. What it does is it logs you out and then essentially creates a hibernate using this hybrid sleep where it writes the current state of the kernel to disk. And then when you boot back up again, it just reloads the Windows, the state of the kernel into memory again. And so you actually may have some weird behavior where if you're shut down, that persists until you do a reboot or turn off the fast boot option. If you have an SSD, I've heard that if you have an SSD, that the fast boot option doesn't really make much of a difference or not. But anyway, Glenn, can you get a link to that fast booter or reboot blocker, because I need that so bad.
I'm gonna put it in here in the chat here, and there you go.
Okay, awesome. I will take a look at that. There also is another tool I was using for Windows related is the debloat Windows 10. I'll put a link in here for this as well, from Chris Titus Tech. It's essentially a collection of things that do different things for removing some of the stuff from Windows you don't want. I will say Be careful with what it does, because there are some things it does I think are too aggressive. But it does turn off automatic updates, but then the idea that you can update manually. So anyway, it's a useful, take a look at that, but don't, I saw something once that said, if you've ever downloaded a script and ran it with admin privileges on your computer, then being concerned about what might be in the vaccine for COVID is an overreaction on your part, because that's, you shouldn't run rogue scripts without looking at them. Anyway.
Oh, there's a fun fact here. Roland points out here. I actually didn't know that apparently Reboot Blogger is developed in Delphi. So
is it? I believe it.
It should have participated in the showcase contest.
They should. Roland, if you have an email with them or know the person involved, I would love to highlight that. Maybe make a blog post about them and show it off. I'm always interested in stuff like that. Showing off cool things made with Delphi. It's interesting how often, though, cool little utilities like that are made in Delphi, because it's just Delphi makes it so easy to do cool stuff like that. So Wagner, I think that Demetrius needs to contact your support, but he's saying that all the different JavaScript files, but he said that when he's using TMS Web Core, he has to divide the JavaScript that it creates into multiple smaller files for optimization purposes. But he said his question was about how to deal with all the different types of files. So you have Pascal code, HTML code, CSS code, JavaScript, etc. Doesn't TMS have a like built on VS Code or something like that, a special tool that works with all those different types of projects, or am I thinking of something else?
Let me understand. I'm reading his question now.
Okay.
This device the application to a beginner for different type of code source Pascal code. How to automate and deal with what exactly?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Well, maybe he's talking about the environment. Well, with TMS Web Core specifically, you just need Delphi. Your application with Delphi using the form designer, and of course, a web application sometimes requires that you have more tools. It's just that web. It's much more complicated than desktop. I joke that I really hope that the web never arrived for us developers, because we would then use Delphi, and life will be much simpler than all this web mess that is web development. But
yeah, there is a lot of complication there for sure.
HTML, CSS, and things like that.
All right, so thanks, Roland.
I'm not sure if sorry. I'm not sure if he's talking about deployment, but you can deploy easily with Delphi itself. Talking about automation, you can do lots of automation in Delphi IDE itself with the post build events, and actually I have recently used it a lot, the tools menu in Delphi IDE, when you can install several tools. And by tools, you can add also a command line with parameters. So for example, you can add a command line to the Delphi IDE menu where you copy some files from here, from there, or execute a batch file. So maybe you can play with it if you need some specific post-build task or before testing task. You can use the Delphi events, post-build, pre-build events, or the codes or the tools menu from the IDE.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, to actually tie into what Wagner is saying here with build automating in Delphi, since Delphi 2007, the core build process is based around MS Build, which means that Delphi is using build extensions, but you can actually automate the whole process with MS Build. And that includes, you can write custom tasks, custom build tasks, which is essentially XML files. And you can tie into different functionality and execute commands, and you can chain them together. And that is also part of what you can utilize in Azure DevOps to after successful compilation, run install shield and compile the installer, extract the MSI file, sign the file. You can do all these things with chaining the MS build tasks, and not only using pre-build or post-build events, but you can actually put it into a configuration. You can have a custom configuration in your project, and then say, when I compile this project, use these additional build tasks. And I think that is actually there's Eli from FMX Express. He has this little multi-build tool. He actually utilized MS Build underneath, and then tells MS Build, instead of building sequentially, do it in parallel, so that if you have multiple projects, you can just take all these projects and throw to them MS Build and say, here, do your thing, and then you have all your project compiled.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think hopefully we got through everybody's questions here. We probably start wrapping up here. Again, it's one of those things we always find something to talk about. I thank you, Wagner and Glenn, for being part of this and answering questions and sharing some of your thoughts and opinions on things. Is there, Wagner, was there anything else that you wanted to discuss that we didn't get a chance to cover yet?
No, I don't think so.
What was the link to your? You said you had a blog post recently around something. What was? Can you put the link for your blog post in the chat window, maybe, or your blog in general?
Sorry, in chat?
Yeah, in the chat window. There it is. All right, great. And then Glenn, I don't know if you had a blog link you want to drop in the chat as well, if people want to follow you or whatever, they can see what you're up to.
Of all my coding shenanigans.
How to automate web application deployment? Which tool can you use to do this, to install, configure for IIS, Apache, etc.? Are there tools? And there's I don't know if what would do both Apache and IIS. So what do you guys use for automating web deployments? Any suggestions in there?
Sorry, you were mute for me for the last minute. I don't know why.
Oh,
can you repeat?
Odd. I'm getting some notifications started popping up here. Maybe that's what's going on. Let me mute that real quick. What for web deployments for Apache and IIS? Are there tools you're aware of or tools you've used to automate the deployment to Apache or IIS? A lot of them are just, I mean, you could stop the service and just copy the files over usually, but anything you would add to that?
Yeah, I mostly do that through sometimes Docker if you are in the test environment and you want to set up something quickly. And like you said, stop the service and send files. To send files, you have different options, of course, but you can automate that using SSH to just directly send with the command line, send the files to the server. You can do that. You can automate that remotely with scripts, but that's pretty much it. With bash scripts.
I think with Apache, and also if you're using another web server like Nginx or light HTTPD, there are Ansible template scripts for automating that part as well. So that, looking into Ansible is probably a good start.
Yeah. So there's a question here from James about using multi-mouse buttons to drive interactions with the IDE like gamers would and such. I used to have a mouse that had a plethora, I think was the total number of buttons it had on it. Unfortunately, I had to switch to an ergonomic mouse. So I don't know if you can see this here. This is my ergonomic mouse I use now, which as far as a usability, ergonomics point of view, this is fabulous. I had some really bad carpal tunnel buildup or come up recently. I ended up having surgery. It's all you can't really see now, but they had sliced my hand open and go in and when I was a kid, they told me, I said when I was really young, like really young, Commodore VIC-20 just came out, and I was like, I'm going to be a computer programmer. Like, oh, don't do that, you'll get carpal tunnel. And I'm like, that's just like the boogeyman. No, it turns out you can get, so you don't get carpal tunnel from typing on computers, but if you have bad repetitive stress and bad arm positions, it can irritate carpal tunnel as a condition that can exist regardless of whether or not you're typing on a computer or not, but you may not notice it unless you're doing things to aggravate it. But the ergonomic mouse helped quite a bit with that, and I have an ergonomic keyboard too. So I don't use that anymore, but I do have, I'll put a link in here to the chat. I do have this, I use auto hotkey a lot, and I have one of these X keys from PI Engineering that's a 24 key keyboard that has things on it. Actually, I have another one I haven't got set up yet that's a little more complicated than that, but lets you automate processes and tasks and stuff like that. And then there's another one by Stream Deck. Yeah, Stream Deck's what the ones thinking of that has that as well. So some comments here about you shouldn't be forced to reboot. I agree, it should be user choice whether or not you reboot and installing things. I'm a big proponent of, the right to repair and the ID that you should be in charge of your hardware and your computer and how it works and how it behaves and stuff. But I do understand, these platforms that, I mean, Microsoft's not the only one. All of them are doing forced reboots now. Some of them are better at communicating it to you than others and giving you options to postpone it. But it is a important thing just for security and health of the ecosystem, because there are a lot of people, some of them in my family, that do not install updates. I mean, and it is dangerous.
It is. I mean, from one point, I understand the Microsoft sentiment of saying, okay, we're going to push out updates more frequently and get you up to date, and ensuring, to limit the attack surface. I mean, that's good. I appreciate their sentiment, but, and I would underline, but we have seen over and over again Microsoft releasing updates that of questionable quality and breaks our system. I mean, it's just a couple of days ago they released an update that if you have certain AMD systems, they pushed out a driver that made your whole system, that said your boot device was inaccessible. They also had an episode where they updated their they pushed out a security fix for the Prince booter, and suddenly you had a slew of printers from a certain manufacturer. As soon as you click print, you just had blue screen. And that has been a recurring phenomenon with Windows 10. Not so much in the previous versions when they actually had a dedicated test team, but now with Windows 10 and this rolling release, that the customers become the testers. The quality of the updates also have shown, either the fixes are not real fixes, or then we maybe have updates that breaks our system. And, that's also a major reason why I want to be in charge of when to reboot my system.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So yeah, a few comments here about carpal tunnel. Yeah, I would say it's like occasionally if I have something that pushes right here, it's a little tender, but otherwise I'm 100% now. I'm doing good. Thank you for all the well wishes. Yeah, but that is it's hard because I understand. I mean, as a software developer, I understand that how easy it is to fix one thing and break something else and such. But you know, I do frequently wait for the I would rather wait a week after the update comes out, unless it's like it's like the boy who cried wolf, right? If every patch that comes out is this is an emergency, install right now, and 90% of them aren't, and 10% of them break my computer, then I don't want to install any patches right away, right? But if there were, this is an emergency patch, you should install it right now, you know, okay, I will stop what I'm doing and install that patch. If legitimately that was an emergency patch, and you know, if it was occasionally, and occasionally it did have some unintended side effects, okay. But if it's but when they abuse that, right, they abuse the thing of being able to say this is urgent, install this patch, and all it's doing is trying to fix some printer updates for somebody else that didn't impact me in the first place, and now my printer quit working or whatever the case is. That makes it very frustrating. And so there's a lot of importance around communication and management and stuff like that. Absolutely. Okay, well, I think we're at the top of the hour, and this has been fantastic. And honestly, I could go on talking with the two of you and answering questions forever. I love this format because I enjoy just hanging out with my friends and chatting with all of you. So thank you for everybody for being part of this. And I'm planning to do a survey I'll send out to everybody about suggestions for future topics and future episodes. So stay tuned for that. And everybody keep up the good work, keep doing amazing things, and I look forward to talking to y'all later. Take care, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Jim. Bye-bye. Thank you, guys.
Bye.